Okay, Bergson and the Holographic Theory of Mind. Back again, part 40, Analogy, Translation, and AI. That is language translation. We're looking at Hofstadter and Sander's critique. Analogies, image schemas, the bodily basis for meaning, invariance laws, the fact that analogy totally pervades language and is the basis of true understanding. Thus AI's problem and the consciousness theorist's problem. Nick Bostrom, an AI proponent, a very great proponent, author of Superintelligence, a book purporting to show that we'll be overtaken by machine intelligence as humans. He noted a list of great successes in AI. For example, the great successes in chess, in Go, even in current language translation. But also, he noted two peaks yet to climb: common sense knowledge and true language understanding. The latter, he thought, at least was going to be attainable by machines. But these are peaks of the same mountain. The mountain's base, analogy. That is the fundamental operation of thought. Analogy suffuses, permeates language totally. It's the basis of true understanding. This is the problem. Analogy requires consciousness, conscious perception, an actual model of perception. Consciousness requires the indivisible flow of time. To come, this problem manifested in AI language translation. I've noted Surfaces and Essences several times by Douglas Hofstadter and Emmanuel Sander. 575 pages chock full of analysis on analogy. Note the subtitle: Analogy is the fuel and fire of thinking. An intended analogy itself, that is the absolute basis for thought, analogy. 2 HNS for short, all concepts, standardly taken to be the building blocks of thought, are analogies. To quote, each concept in our mind owes its existence to a long succession of analogies made unconsciously over many years, initially giving birth to the concept and continuing to enrich it over the course of our lifetime. That is, concepts, or categories, as they show quite convincingly are the same thing, are created by the continual operation of analogy. The making of analogies is an incessant flow in our thought, a continuous comparison of the now to past experience, our past experiences. The concrete is meeting the abstract, a very down-to-earth phrase applied to a down-to-earth situation. The concepts the phrase is built from, distant to that situation, abstract from it. Marie is off her rocker. Their love affair went down the drain. The professor says, only a handful of students dropped in on me. But we don't think Marie actually fell off her rocking chair, or the lovers are actually circling down the drain, or that students are parachuting in or dropping in on the professor somehow. This is high abstraction, but continually subserved by the great concreteness of our experience, a concreteness which does not even register. Without this concrete basis, there is no true understanding, as Bostrom knew they needed, AI needs. But this is the plight of the machine. Now in Hofstadter and Sander, there is a section on the machine translation of language. They take a paragraph, an obituary from Francois Sakana, a famous dramatist playwright. It appeared in Le Monde, September 2004. In French, it looks as such. I'm not going to read it because my French is minimal and horrendous, but we'll come back to this very sentences thereof. HNS looked at the Google translation, circa 2004. That is Google's version of 2004. Sometimes it reads, success was not with the Go. One thinks of it in vain very extremely. The good number does not leave inevitably. Sakana took the failures of dramatic author like the reverses of casino with respect for the whims of the bank and the sky. It is necessary well to lose a little for better enjoying gains it following day. Who did not see it recovering, quote unquote, in a few 15 minutes the losses of a whole night cannot include/understand as they is Mary of Naguer, whatever, Google can translate that word, the fate. This method was based on massive lookup tables comparing English phrases to stored French phrases, their method at the time. Then HNS returned to look at the Google translation version thereof, 2009. Sometimes success was not there. It was nice to think very hard. The proper number does not necessarily spell. Sakana took the failures as a dramatist, such as Backhand Casino. With respect to the whims of the bank in the sky, it must be losing a little. Better enjoy the games overnight. Who did not see recover in a few minutes, lost a whole night, can understand how happy it is, the sort of taunt. Now this was based in a statistical method, still looking at patterns in phrases of the two languages. I ran it through Google 2019, 6 years after the book appeared. Sometimes the success was not at the rendezvous. We think very hard. The right number does not necessarily come out. Sakana took dramatic author failures like casino setbacks with respect for the whims of the bank in the sky. You have to lose a little to better savor the next day's win. What has not seen it recover in a few quarters of an hour the losses of a whole night can understand how joyful it is to taunt the spell. Now, relative to the previous versions thereof, this is an applause-worthy translation. It actually almost makes sense, very close. So what happened between 2009 and 2019? Well, deep learning networks. Thus, a more sophisticated, yet statistical algorithm. So let's look at HNS's human translation, their own. Sometimes things just didn't work out right. No matter how hard she wished for it, the dice simply wouldn't come up her way. But Sakana always took her failures as a playwright, much as she took her gambling losses, acknowledging the arbitrary whims of the house and of divine fate. After all, everyone has to lose now and then, so that the next day's victory will taste all the sweeter. And if you never saw her win back a whole night's losses in well under an hour, you just can't have any idea of the glee she took in laughing at the face of destiny. So let's take a look at a few of these sentences in that French version. English translation for the whims of the bank in the sky, human, the whims of the house and of divine fate. And of course, the French, de la banque et du ciel. Now there's something operating here. HNS invoked the notion of a frame for Fauconnier and Turner. Here is the frame of gambling casinos, and a being, Sakana, who loved gambling. In reality, this frame, a static phrase, is extremely dynamic. It's the entire dynamic frame of gambling that we as humans experience and know. Ciel can be sky, heaven, blueness, air, mid-air, a vault, canopy, ceiling, clouds, the atmosphere, space. The frame will determine the selection. But Google, the machine, does not understand the frame at all. In this frame, ciel must be something like heaven, fate, luck, providence. And the bank is the house, the internal bank of the casino. For Hofstadter and Sander, Fauconnier and Turner describe something they called frame blends. These are innocuous-seeming adjective-noun combos. That is innocuous, that is, they look very simple. A safe child, a safe beach, a safe knife. Simple enough. But a safe beach, this demands a beach scenario where there is a threat, sharks, undertows, gangs, versus the actual beach, where one is mapped to the other, yielding the difference. A safe knife, and knives that pose a threat, compared to knives or knife usage without being cut, where one is mapped to the other, again yielding the difference, safety. Even garden variety color adjectives, red, green, blue, yellow, involve these blends. Red, for example, blends of red hair, red wine, red pencil, red fox. Even an isolated noun may require a blend to make sense. A dent, for example, a comparison between a pristine car from the factory and a car deformed by an accident. Yes, for those familiar with this series, we are talking now about the absolute requirement for Bergson's 4D being, that is, a memory that retains all of experience, multimodal experience as 4D extended being, to retain all of the detail necessary for these kinds of blends. Again, another sentence. Again, looking at the English, sometimes the success was not at the rendezvous. Now the frame, casino gambling, already says, why is rendezvous in the Google translation still at all? Surely this is some form of encounter, say with fate, with chance, with luck, at the gaming table. Yes, this is the first sentence of the paragraph, but a human would instantly see from the following sentences what the frame is, that is casino gambling, and translate accordingly. Another sentence. We think very hard. The right number does not necessarily come out. The human version, no matter how hard she wished for it, the dice simply wouldn't come up her way. Again, a subtle aspect of our human experience in this dynamic frame of casino gambling, our intense wishing for a great outcome when the dice roll or the roulette wheel spins. Hardly we think very hard. This makes no sense. But this dynamic frame is beyond the machine. That is, the machine is nothing, possesses nothing of this dynamic experience, this 4D memory. Another sentence. Google 2019. What has not seen it recover in a few quarters of an hour, the losses of a whole night? The human, and if you never saw her win back a whole night's losses. Notice, so why? Google is still stuck at it. Why? It versus her. Well, knowing the frame would warn you of a subtlety in syntax. The E tacked onto vous, or vous, past participle of voir, that is to see, to watch. The French grammar, the past participle, my PP, must agree in gender / number with its object. Therefore, it's feminine and singular, that is Francois, not it. Not to mention the sad translation, tant, the spell. Again, the frame says we're dealing with destiny, with fate. There's no level of language that is not analogy or not metaphoric. Both are mappings onto events, that is, an experience onto another experience. Beneath this mapping, as I've been pointing out, are the invariant structures defining concrete events. That is, in Gibsonian terms, the information, the actual information specifying the event. Velocity flow fields, adiabatic ratios, inertial tensors, texture gradients. It is this structure of invariance that makes these events analogies for each other. It is different forms of stirring. Yes, common components, that is a form of invariant, can be listed. There's always an instrument, the spoon, a force, a medium, the liquid medium, an agent behind the force, a container constraining the liquid, a swirling motion, support for the container, a table. But this dynamic structure with its mathematical laws binds them all together in an indivisible whole. For true understanding of language, for AI, there's no escape from this. Take the most literal, apparently non-metaphoric of sentences. The man is in the room. What underlies even the meaning of this? Now, two theorists invoked by Hofstadter and Sander, namely George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, both emphasize the fundamental role of bodily experience in providing concepts. Kinesthetic image schemas in one term, idealized cognitive models for the other. Ultimately, the very ground of meaning. A schema they defined as a current or recurrent pattern, shape, and regularity in our actions and perceptions. That is an invariant, or an invariance structure in my terms. I emphasize the invariance because these people simply ignore all these invariance laws. They emerge as meaningful structures chiefly at the level of bodily movements, manipulations of objects, perceptual interactions, bodily manipulations like manipulating the spoon, perceptual interaction, that is feeling all the forces and resistances and watching the swirl, etc. Exactly an invariant structure. So take one of their schemas, the body as container. Things go in and out of our body. This correlates with the multiplicities of ins and outs in the perceived world. Toast in the toaster, toast out of the toaster, hand in the glove, out of the glove, etc., etc. The body is also experienced as in containers, in the tub, in the room. Containership has its own structure, an interior, an exterior, a boundary. It generates or underlies a basic logic, the Boolean logic of classes, inclusion, exclusion. It underlies basic metaphors. The visual field is a container. Things come and go out of it. Now for Lakoff, this is to emphasize the integral unity of these structures. These structures are not simply unanalyzable as some would construe a Gestalt, as if you call these Gestalts, but they have a real structure where the components dynamically interact, as our coffee stirring. They cannot be broken down into simple sets of logically independent propositions, i.e., to the right proposition set, the spoon stirs, the cup holds coffee, cup walls constrain the liquid, the hand moves, the table is still. Or neural net, just a transformation of the same idea. Spoon can stir, spoon can scoop. That is neural net weightings that link them all together, but they're just essentially more propositions, independent. These structures are central to understanding even the most literal language, supposedly literal. They permeate language. An image schema or invariant structure, in my terms, underlies even the most simple and literal sentence. The man is in the room. That is literal, just equals old, dead, or used analogy or metaphor. Other aspects of even the most literal language, supposedly literal. For example, the modal verbs, can, must, may. These rely on invariance underlying our experience of force. One such, the compulsion schema, symbolized abstractly as such. More concretely, we see it there. This is an event structure, an object impacted by a force which it cannot resist, with a resultant motion in some direction. We experience it bodily when being swept along in a crowd, when struck by another football player, or when we're poor Homer, impact. Other force schemas, blockage, counterforce, diversion, removal of restraint, enablement, attraction. In Sweetzer's analysis of the modal verbs, discussed by Johnson, the modal verb must, its root sense rests on the compulsion schema. It denotes a compelling force that moves the subject to act. The wind is coming. The leaf must move. Physical force is but one dimension. The force may be authoritative, social, i.e. from peer pressure, or moral. Steve must wash the dishes. His mom says so. I know about that one. Joe must go to the party or no one will like him. Sally must tell the truth. The modal may relies on the schema for removal of restraint, one of the four schemas. We may be able to cure his cold. Usually there's a barrier to the completion of the action, but success in removing it is possible, like removing the snowbank, removing the handcuffs. In this, again, supposedly literal use of language above, we see emerging the principle discussed earlier in the context of mellow. All these things are mellow. The perception of invariance across multiple modalities or dimensions. That is, we're perceiving a certain quality across violins or rooms or wines or even beings, the kitty. But remember, invariance is amodal, the basis for cross-modal metaphor. That amodality is the basis for this cross-modality in the everyday use of language as its expression. In the case of must, we have an invariance across realms of force. social, psychological, physical, etc. A metaphor, in Johnson's early terminology, is a projection from one realm of experience to another, a form of mapping, or, if you will, a frame blend. I noted, I've been saying this for some of these series. A little analogy there, Johnny catapulted spinach at Big Sister. Again, my little note there, the projection of an invariant structure of one dynamic event upon another, over which the features, remember, features are something that AI likes to think it can set, a fixed set of features, not possible, on which the analogy appears to be based, emerge. In other words, the emergence of features is a dynamic product of the mapping itself. But again, we deal with perceived invariance. So a building is a structured collection of material with form, a plan, a purpose, like the Hardy chicken coop there. So is a theory, a structure of thought. In everyday use, a fundamental metaphor is a theory is a building. This metaphor with its underlying schema supports, again, the most supposedly literal language. His theory is well supported. What is the foundation of this theory? We have only a framework for the theory so far. Now, as we go beyond this normal use, the used portion of the metaphor in Johnson's terms, and move to more neglected aspects of the realm or domain, more exotic aspects, we move to the only more obvious examples of the metaphoric. His theories are massive, Gothic, with gargoyles everywhere. Or that theory is old, rickety, and full of horrors. Further examples of the supposedly literal language, in reality metaphors, particularly with their basis in a kinesthetic image schema, are the crime rate is rising. Our sales dropped last year. These are instances of more basic metaphor, more is up, less is down. Metaphors have a target and a source, a mapping of source domain to target domain. Here, the source is verticality. Why? It's directly understood via bodily experience. The origin, the up-down kinesthetic image schema, which structures all of our functioning relative to gravity. Target, quantity. A structural correlation in our everyday experience defines the mapping, more to up, less to down. Pour water in a glass. Quantity increases, the level goes up. Add more objects to a pile. Sand grains, level of the pile rises. Remove the objects, the level goes down. Now I note the acoustical frequency, by the way, rises proportionally. The sound pitch as the vertical height increases of the water. Again, one of the invariance laws defining this event. We'll hit this again. Lecoff demonstrates schemas which define structure in our bodily experience preconceptually have a basic logic. Preconceptual, that is perceptual, structural correlations in experience motivate mapping that logic onto abstract domains. This allows us a theory of meaning based on aspects of bodily function or functioning, that is, basing meaning in the body. Recall, Bergson defines perception as virtual action. I'm perceiving how I can act. At our normal scale of time, the fly is a buzzing being, its wings a blur. It's difficult to act on those wings. At a different scale of time, where he's flapping his wings like a butterfly, that butterfly is now reflecting the possibility of the body's action, reaching out slowly and grabbing the fly, butterfly-like fly, by the wingtip. So the bodily basis of meaning has a profound resonance. However, what I've just said here in virtual action, display of possible action, is that vision and action are intrinsically reciprocal, interrelated. So you can't ignore vision along with the body. The up is more example, for example, an increase of quantity with the correlated rise of level of both height of the water and acoustical frequency, the rising pitch, a visual acoustic invariance structure. And you can see this structure, this law expressed coming up here in Susie's inbox as it rises. And a metaphor appropriate to that, the filling of Susie's inbox reached a new pitch, an abstraction based on that invariance. So preconceptual is merely a neutral word. We're talking about perception. Take the category anger. I emphasize category. Anger is a category, a concept. Same thing. Hofstadter and Sander demonstrate this indubitably. So it is a concept Lakoff feels Gibson could not account for. Lakoff generally just considers affordances, and Gibson does not understand the concept of the invariance laws underlying the affordances. That's why I keep emphasizing this. So this limitation would be true if Gibson is so limited, but he is not. There's a general model of physiological effects of anger. It underlies our linguistic statements with reference to it. It goes as follows. The physiological effects of anger are increased body heat, increased internal pressure, blood pressure, muscular pressure, agitation, interference with accurate perception. For statements on anger, there's a general principle of metonymy that's employed. One thing is used to stand for another. In this case, the physiological effects of an emotion are used to stand for the emotion. With this, we get statements relating to the various aspects of the model. For agitation, she was shaking with anger. I was hopping mad. He was quivering with rage. She was all stirred up. Or for body heat, don't get hot under the collar. Billy's a hothead. They were having a heated argument. This model forms the basis for the most general metaphor for anger. Anger is heat. This is a solid, and a fluid version. The fluid version, we'll look at here, the body as a container of the emotions. Anger is a heated fluid under pressure, contained in the body. Just like the pan is containing it, put a cover on it. The body is a container of emotions. He was filled with anger. She couldn't contain her joy. She was brimming with rage. Or anger is heated fluid in a container. You make my blood boil. Simmer down. I had reached the boiling point. Let him stew. Continuing this aspect of the model, we end at the explosion model, with parts of the person going up in the air. I blew my top. He hit the ceiling. She flipped her lid. I blew my stack. And what's inside coming out? Smoke was pouring out of his ears. Some points to make now. Point the first. The basis for metaphor, the image schemas, the frames. This relies on invariance structures with their multimodal aspects. Stirring with its optical flow fields, sonic aspects, tensors, kinesthetic flow fields. Boiling, flipping, simmering, stewing. All are events defined by invariance laws. This is the information, as Gibson described it, specifying the event. It is the basic start in perception. It is the basis for perceiving yet higher order invariance, ever increasing degrees of abstraction. Bob was stewing over the bad computer code. But all is based in these concrete events, forces, materials. You must have this. Point the second. All is experience, experience, experience. Multimodal, dynamic, continuous forces, physiological forces, ratios of force, heat, cold, suction, body slams, pressures, swallowing, chewing, and continuous, an indivisible flow, not discrete instant after instant after instant. Mellow, the mellowness of a room, of a wine, of a violin, of a being is noted cannot exist in a single discrete instant, or set of such, where each instant disappears as the next arrives. That is the classic metaphysic I've noted many times, where we've got essentially a set of instantaneous cubes of the all of space, flowing and not flowing, but actually occurring one after the other, each one disappearing as the next arrives in time. That is, there never being more than one instant in time. But you have to have a different model, an indivisible model for mellowness All these qualities must develop over an indivisible flow of time. Point to third. For all this, one needs a device, quote unquote, that stores, again in quotes, the entirety of 4D experience. Better, has the 4D entirety available and can access it with all the invariants defined across these experiences in all their modalities. Now, only Bergson gives a vision of such a device, that is, of the brain as such a device. That is, the brain as being a modulated reconstructive wave passing through the indivisibly transforming holographic field, and specific then to a part of this field, thereby an image within the field at a scale of time. And first then, this device must be able to perceive the time-extended qualitative events that comprise this experience. That is, a model of perception, as we've been describing. Point the fourth, curiosity. The concrete, analogy-based nature of language understanding has obviously long been known. Before Hofstadter, the entire cognitive grammar movement, the grammar folks moving against Chomsky's conception of syntax and language understanding. Lakoff, Johnson, Sweetser, Chaffee, the Green Book there, Paul Dean, attempting to derive a whole new syntax, cognitively based. Not to mention Piaget. Why Piaget? Just quickly remember the concrete operations. The child's learning of the odd-even rule. Odd-even number of rotations, semi-rotations of that tunnel changes the order of the beads. Even number preserves the order of the beads going in and out. Highly schematized images of rotation of which the child isn't even aware ultimately as he learns the rule. But he's gone through the detailed imaging of those semi-rotations in his mind. 1 rotation, 2, 3, 4, etc. So just like the gal falling off her rocker, Marie fell off her rocker, is off her rocker, we don't even visualize that anymore. We have something highly analogous going on in concrete operations, let alone just looking at those topics of Piaget, the construction of reality in the child's conception of physical causality, conception of space, child's conception of the world, of movement and speed, of number. All this is underlying the metaphoric and analogic understanding of language is being brought to bear. But never taken to heart by AI or cognitive science. Why? Well, I would submit because no one has any clue about the nature of the device that can support this. AI cannot support imagery, dynamic imagery, transformations of imagery. It can't support, remember, Penrose's successively stacking 3-sided cubes. So they're chained to the machine model, and its conception, its deficient conception of information, which cannot support this. But they have no other idea or conception, nor why a device with a concrete dynamics is required in the first place, both for consciousness and cognition. Deep learning nets is the answer, a delusion, and chained to the machine model. Point the fifth. No theory of consciousness grasps that this is a problem. This being that a theory of consciousness must provide a basis for this, a framework for this, that is, for true understanding, and thus the operation of analogy. And that this begins in your theory of perception, that is, in the hard problem, and that a hard problem solution must provide the basis for true understanding, again, being the operation of analogy based on this concrete experience. There's virtually no grasp of this. We have seen IITC, Integrated Information Theory, OR, User Interface Theory with Hoffman, Chalmers, Embodied Embedded. We will see Higher Order Thought Theory, HOT, maybe Global Workspace Theory, maybe Searle. Hot, for example, relies completely on concepts. Concepts, higher order thoughts, drive or make things conscious, and yet there's undoubtedly little factoring in of what Hofstadter and Sander mean for concepts. That is, the operation of analogy, creating concepts continuously. So all have the same myopia, which is also to say that there is not a true understanding of the hard problem. So short postscript. I've not done near justice to surfaces and essences. It is a book that an AI or cog-sci person should study and study and study, and then think, what does this mean for the brain? This, for example, is what I found myself doing very roughly 24 works of Piaget for years, and for Cassir's works. AI, cognitive science, need to do the same for these works too, and the consciousness theorists. There is too little grasp that this is one integrated problem. Memory, cognition, cognitive development, analogy, not hard versus easy per Chalmers. These are all difficult and part of the same difficulty. So all begins with the model of perception. So down the road, I'm struck by Kastrup's new idealism book, The Idea of the World. Again, another defense of idealism, though he's changed the story to my mind a bit from the last time we looked at him. But he might argue differently. I would argue that he has. But this whole onslaught of idealism seems again to be, to me, just this ricochet phenomenon from the hard problem and the deficient idea of realism that the hard problem represents, which is based in the classic metaphysic, never examined. So having just dealt with Hoffman's idealism, I'm kind of reminded of a movie that I saw advertised as a little boy, Them. And you'll see the little phrase up there, kill one, two more appear. Apparently these giant ants, as they were very difficult to get rid of. So I guess they were idealistic ants. So I think we're going to look at that again, as well as hot theory, temporal consciousness, which I keep threatening to do, which is a philosophical mess. Bostrom's book on superintelligence, I think, is worth looking at, and of course, there's always something else. So, till then, I think it's going to be a Kastrup idealism, psychedelics, which he brings in, which he thinks is a defense of, or an argument in favor of idealism, their effects thereof, and I think, in reality, he actually invokes Bergson and completely doesn't realize what he's done. So, this could be interesting. So, till then, signing off.